TaxAct can think of a million things more fun than filing taxes. TaxAct is going to name some now. Sitting in traffic. Folding a fitted bedsheet. Listening to your coworker talk about his fantasy team. Digging a hole. Digging an even larger hole next to that original hole. Unfortunately, TaxAct's filing software can't make taxes fun. But TaxAct can help you get them done. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
The reviews are in for McDonald's hotter, juicier burgers. Let's hear what Hamburglar has to say.
Robble, robble.
What our old friend Hamburglar said is, the patties are juicier. The bun is a thing of beauty. The cheese perfectly melted.
Robble.
My burger dreams have come true. You heard him, folks. These are McDonald's best burgers ever. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Robble. Available at most restaurants in this area. Comparison of McDonald's classic burgers to prior burgers.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.
When it comes to teaching kids and teens about money, practice makes perfect. That's where Greenlight comes in. With a debit card and money app of their own, kids learn to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest. Parents send instant money transfers, create custom chores, and automate allowance, while kids track their spending, set savings goals, and practice money skills they can use today and for life. Get 1 month free when you sign up at greenlight.com/podcast.
How's it going, and welcome back to On the Wire, a proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter at OnTheWirePod. And of course, if you're listening on a platform that allows ratings and reviews, please take a second to let us know what you think. I am Adam Howe, and as always, I am joined by the 2020 TGFBI champion, Kevin Hastings. Kevin, I was curious to know, what role do you think the holiday weekend that we're currently in will play into this week's FAAB?
People will forget. It will happen.
I was hoping that was your answer.
that quick. People will get busy over the weekend and forget or get frantic, as we talked off the air, as I did here this evening. But it won't be us, and it won't be people that listen to us. Hopefully, as long as they do listen this week. And yeah, it's just, I understand people may not put as much time into it as they usually do, but don't forget, take a look. Make sure you're not taking zeros at least.
Yeah, don't forget, Kevin and I do on a regular basis to place our FAAB bids
Right.
in our podcast league, which FAAB runs on Saturday instead of Sunday. That is our weekly reminder to ourselves to make sure we get those bids in. Somebody else who probably should be getting those bids in is our very special guest this week, Steve Gesuele from the Wins Above Fantasy podcast is here to join us over the holiday weekend to talk FAAB and break it down for us. Of course, Wins Against Fantasy, part of the Pitcher List Podcast Network, and he can be found hosting that on Wednesdays along Van Burnett. Please make sure to check that out if you're not already, wherever you're listening to this podcast. Hey, Steve, thanks for taking the time out of your holiday weekend to talk some waiver wire action with us. How you doing?
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. This is an honor. You guys do great stuff. No, you are a central part of my waiver process each week, and it goes beyond that. It's a great insight. So really, thank you guys again for having me on, and hope I could be a contributing member here and giving even more of an advantage now that we're reminding you to do your FAAB on a holiday weekend. We'll actually have to give some good advice, but that's a start, right? It always helps to get your bids in.
Yeah, it's funny though, because it's like the FAAB runs in different leagues are run so differently. Of course, like I mentioned, in our podcast league, it runs on Yahoo, and we run that FAAB on Saturday nights. So we get those players on our rosters. We can't do anything with them until Monday, as it is a weekly league. Then you have most of the FAAB runs on Sunday night, with NFBC locking at 10. But then leagues on Fantrax, most of them lock at 11 p.m. And we touched on that last week, Kevin, where you get a little bit of advantage when you do both leagues on those two different formats. You got to have some time to check out what those bids are going to be, and at least maybe make some adjustments based on what you've seen. You only got an hour to do that, but it's still interesting to see how the different FAAB runs. And then I play in another league where our guillotine league, through the pitcher list, the wacky leagues, we have 4 FAAB runs each week, or 3 or 4 FAAB runs each week. So players are all jumping around. It's not exactly daily moves. It's daily, you can change your lineups daily, but we run FAAB like 3 times a week. So it's interesting to see the players that get jumped around and how much they go for in that league. All right, we'll move right into our news and notes section. Get right to the good stuff. We don't have that much to talk about this week, at least not stuff that's going to directly affect FAAB. So, Steve, we'll start off with you. Michael Brantley in Houston hit the IL on Friday, retroactive to the 25th. Who do you see within the Astros roster filling that void in that outfield?
So it's surprising. Like, the Astros have such a good offense. I think they're top 3 or 4 in WRC plus around the league. And there's some strange guys that are in there every day. And one of them that I think should be seeing a boost in playing time is Chas McCormick. His slash line isn't too great, but he should be able to provide some decent pop and throw in some steals. He's had a few seasons in the minors where he's come close to double-digit stolen bases. Already has 4 home runs this year already. I think he stole a base today too. It's not like an automatic, okay, I have Brantley, I need to run to replace him to my wire, but he could be a decent option, especially with an increase in playing time here and a nice source of power and speed.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see if Brantley just misses just the minimum amount of time here in Houston. But at the very least, he's going to be out all of next week, so in weekly leagues. So that's an easy sit. And to see if McCormick or anybody else gets that extra playing time. So it's definitely worth looking into, especially in that Houston lineup. Kevin, Owen Miller, Alek Manoah, and Tyler Nevin made their MLB debuts for their respective clubs this week. Though we're probably not sitting on the precipice of FAABapalooza 2021 just yet with these guys. Which of these 3 debuts, not named Alek, do you think sticks around the longest?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to me here. I'm not really interested in either one at the moment. So I think Miller sticks around probably the longest and maybe can start to perform better than he has thus far. Just his 4 hits and 24, I think, plate appearances so far. It's not been great. One of them was a double, but I don't see, and I don't think Nevin's even played in a game yet, has he? Baltimore, was he in today's lineup? Because I don't think he had played yet.
He played today. I'm not sure if he played which game of the doubleheader he played today, but he went 1 for 2 on the day. So he did play today. He'll be in the pool for tomorrow's FAAB run, at least in NFBC. So both guys will be available.
And the thing with him is he was striking out so much at AAA this year so far. So I'm not really sure. That's not really what he's done in the past, so we should improve on that. But he was doing it at AAA, so do we expect him to improve on it at the major league level? I just have more questions than answers here on both of these guys. The funny thing about Nevin is he's great plate discipline, but he wasn't showing it at AAA thus far this year, and 73 plate appearances, striking out 10 percentage points higher than normal and not walking nearly as much either. So that's concerning and very interesting to me that he got this call in this situation. I really don't have an answer for you on this one.
I talked with Justin Mason over on the FWFB Friends with Fantasy Benefit podcast earlier this week about Miller. And the only interest I have in Miller is the fact that he had early on in the week, he had already played third base. And throughout the rest of the week, he's already played second base twice. He's played third base another time, and he's DH. So he's not there to just fill in for Framil Reyes, though that was the roster move that was made to bring him up. So if he can continue to play all around the diamond, there's a lot more interest in him if he gets that multi-positional flexibility. He already has shortstop eligibility. That's what he came up with. So if he can add third base, thus adding corner infield and middle infield into his availability, that changes it a little bit. I see Miller sticking around a lot longer than Nevin just because of the opportunity. They don't really have anybody else in the Cleveland system that can come up and fill that void, at least not readily in the upper minors. So at least not in the way Miller does. So
and they had that rain out today, and he's played every day since he came up. And two of them at third base, two of them at DH, and then one each at second base and shortstop. So, on his way. In a lot of leagues, he's 40% of the way there for third base. So,
yeah, he even batted second on Thursday as well. So he's batting all over the lineup, mostly the bottom third, batting sixth or seventh. Did have one game as DH in the 2-hole. So something to monitor there for sure. All right, Steve, we'll go down to Miami. Starlin Marte returned from his IL stint for the Marlins, but replacing him on the IL is shortstop Miguel Rojas with a dislocated index finger, with Brian Anderson also on the IL and Jazz Chisholm and Adam Duvall battling their own injuries, one worse than the other. Is there anyone that's going to get extra run in the Marlins lineup that it's worth looking into?
Yeah, I'm interested in Garrett Cooper. I'm always a little interested in Garrett Cooper. He's got some interesting underlying metrics. He always hits the ball hard. He's doing that again this year. He's 92nd percentile in max exit velocity, 88th percentile in hard hit percentage. And he's got a decent line so far, 5 home runs, 267, 340 with a 432 slug, which isn't going to win you any leagues, but it's a decent replacement, especially if you're in deeper leagues and trying to fill those guys' spots in the Marlins that are on the shelf right now. So I think when the Marlins are fully healthy, Cooper gets squeezed and is on the wrong side of a platoon there. But with those guys hurt, he probably should get some decent run. And he's got the X stats back it up. It's a 257 XBA, a 425 X slug. So it's not like he's getting super lucky behind these pretty decent numbers. But today, a 267 average is going to help you more than it's going to hurt you. A decent average with some pop, I think Garrett Cooper can get some run here and a little additional playing time.
I will chime in as well and just give a shout out to John Birdie, who's been playing at third base with Brian Anderson out earlier in the week and should continue to see that playing time moving forward, especially with Miami going to Buffalo next week for a couple of games where they'll get the extra DH spot in their lineup for at least for those 2 games. All right, Kevin, your Kansas City Royals put Josh Staumont on the IL with a left knee sprain. How concerned are you with Staumont as he makes his way back? And should we expect Matheny to go back to giving every reliever and their cousin a save opportunity in Kansas City? Or you think he's going to turn to one guy? And they haven't had an opportunity since Staumont went on the IL, including today.
Right. Last night's game was still interesting, however. And even with Staumont, he wasn't the one guy. They just weren't going to do that, at least not yet. I get the sense that's what they want to do. They want Staumont to be the guy. I was a little worried pre-injury. His velocity's been down. He's been giving up base runners, getting the job done, but just hasn't looked as sharp as he did earlier in the year when he wasn't getting the save opportunities. So hopefully this little break, and it's a knee, not his arm. Hopefully this little bit of rest and he's back when first eligible. But what was interesting about last night's game is we've talked about Kyle Zimmer several times on the show about being one of the middle relievers that we could use maybe once in a while, especially in holds leagues, but he can vulture a win. They use him in situations whether they have the lead or not. But he came in and bailed out Zuber last night, who Zuber was getting some traction earlier in the season to get higher leverage situations, but he was just horrible. Walked the bases loaded last night after getting the first out of the inning. And so then they had to bring Zimmer in with a 5-run lead and the bases loaded in the 7th inning. Zimmer was already getting a little bit of talk over the past week or so about maybe getting some opportunities. And I think he is probably the guy they have the most confidence in. And then Brent's pitched the final 2 innings last night, and he has looked phenomenal at times, but I don't think they quite trust him yet. So I see if this were a closer game, that kind of being flip-flopped, and maybe most nights we're looking at Brent's as a setup guy for Zimmer to finish it out. Holland and Davis, I think of both, they're still there. They're still on the roster, still in the bullpen. I don't see them getting real high at leverage situations going forward. I think they've both blown it. So it's to answer your question, it's up in the air. It could be any of one guy. Barlow's there too. They like him earlier in games. They like him to bail him out when necessary. If I had to pick a guy while Starmont is out, I think I'd go with Zimmer.
Yeah, I think Zimmer probably gets it by default, if no real other reason. He's gotten the last save, right, in Kansas City. Right. And so we'll see when their next opportunity does arise for the Royals to get any more clarification on that. All right, Steve. In San Diego, Austin Nola returned to the IL, this time with a slight knee sprain. Jay Stingler said that he expected Nola to be out, quote, just a couple of weeks, which at the very least sounds a bit more than the minimum 10-day stay. For those single catcher league managers that like to stream catchers, how interested in Victor Carantini should they be? Not to mention those in 2 catcher leagues where he's still available. And I believe he still has a 60 or so % availability in TGFBI, for an example. And if
I honestly don't know. I had Austin Nola. I actually made a swap for him for Sean Murphy in a daily league earlier this week. And then Nola promptly was hurt and didn't play at all. So I am rolling catcherless right now in that daily league. I actually chose to add Kyle Zimmer instead of a catcher in that daily league. So I guess that goes to show how much I'm interested in Carantini, but I think I should probably be a little more interested. I think he has 2 stolen bases from a catcher position with 3 home runs. I could have that flip-flop, but it might honestly work, especially if you were rostering Nola and wait for him to get going. He really didn't at all. I think even when he came back from his hand injury, he got hit on the hand. So he kind of wasn't playing that much when he was quote unquote healthy. I'm definitely interested. We have an ad limit in the league that I have him that I had Nola in. So next week, if Carantini's still there, when we get our ads back on Monday, I'll definitely be trying to claim him just to fill that spot in a warm body. And it hasn't been horrible. And I take anything that's not a 0 essentially from the catcher position, and Carantini kind of can do that. I think not in a traditional way, maybe some steals and a decent average. I like it if you're like me and trying to find anybody to fill a catcher spot.
Yeah, the main reason I would be looking at Carantini is just the fact that he's going to play pretty much every day. He's going to get 80-85% of the playing time behind the plate in San Diego, and of course in that lineup, no matter where you hit, you're going to get opportunities there. The other thing that interests me about Carantini is just the fact that he's not a very good thrower from behind the plate when it comes to trying to catch would-be base stealers, as I've found. And with more opportunity to not throw out base stealers, I'd be targeting guys on the opposing teams that he'd be facing to maybe swipe a steal in my leagues where I need an extra bag this week. So that's the Cubs and the Mets this week, and anybody in the future as well. Doesn't really help the cause to pick up Carantini per se, but something to keep an eye out.
No, that's always useful information too. So that's a great point there.
Kevin, back in New York, Luke Voit went back on the IL with a right oblique strain. Does this make your boy Rugi Odor playable again, or is there anyone else in the Yankees roster worth watching?
It's interesting. He's played the last 4 games and had a 4-for-5 night. We don't see many of those out of Rougned Odor with a home run. That was Thursday night, I believe.
Took advantage of that short porch, yeah.
Yeah. So when he's playing, we can say this about so many guys these days, but we've always said it about Odor, right? You have to be able to withstand that batting average. I don't see it getting much above 200 if it gets to 200 this season. But when they've needed a left-handed bat, the Yankees have continued to roll him out there, even when Mike Ford is playing first base. Have Odor go to second and LeMahieu to third. So I think he's going to get the playing time. If you're in need of power, and he's streaky, he's a streaky guy. We know that. I think you could do worse, but you really have to be able to withstand that batting average.
Yeah, DJ LeMahieu missed a couple of games. I believe he was on the big regimentally list for the Yankees. He did come back for their doubleheader the other day. And of course, he was back at the leadoff spot as well, playing first base as well today. So he's not taking over second base, at least on the early goings. And that leaves the opportunity for Odor to stay there and tread water and do whatever Odor does. I said it before, and I'll say it again, like the only negative, or one of the negatives on Odor from my perspective, is that he got traded to New York. And yes, he's a lefty in that lineup, and he can take advantage like he did the other day on that short porch on the power department. But the Yankees just don't run. They don't steal. And that's what added to his value, made you forget about.
Yeah, he'd throw in 10 stolen bases with those 30 home runs.
Exactly. He's not going to, it's already been shown he's not going to do that with New York. So he's got to make it up in other areas. Steve, Brandon Belt was placed on the IL by the Giants earlier this week, and though he may only miss the minimum time, who do you see getting extra at-bats next week with the Giants as they host the Angels and Cubs? May it be somebody who doesn't have to platoon anymore because the Giants platoon everybody, or somebody new coming in?
Yeah, I kind of like Jason Vosler. He raked in spring training. I was a little surprised that he didn't make the team out of camp, but I think he should get a little more run here. His primary position is third, and obviously Longoria is holding that down, but he could play some first and slide in there for Belt. He's got a decent amount of pop for the last 3 years in the minors. 2019, 2018, 2017, he had at least 20 homers. He's like a late bloomer guy, older, not like an up-and-coming prospect or anything like that. He's already 27. But he had that hot spring, and definitely someone that I kept an eye on and was interested in coming out of spring, and he should get a decent shot here.
Yeah, since he came back up, he pinch run and stayed at first base, played first base again on the 27th, and then he did play third base today. 1-0 for 4, but he started at third base today, so it does give them a little bit more flexibility on the corner spots, as you mentioned. All right, Kevin, we talk about this, I feel like, literally every week, but today is official. Cody Bellinger and Zach McKinstry will return to the Dodgers lineup Saturday. Both started today, Saturday. I know we talk about this pretty much every week, but I want to, beat it into the ground a little bit more. What effects are you seeing in regards to playing time in LA, thanks to both of them being back at the same time on the same day?
Yeah, as expected, they were both in the lineup tonight, and it's interesting, right? Betts is not, but they have Pujols at first base.
Wasn't that the quote? You got to get his head right.
And they got to get his back, but that's the issue. And it's actually becoming worrisome that I don't roster Betts on any of my teams. I don't think I had a top 5 pick in any league, but so I don't have Betts, but I do have Christian Yelich, and it's hurt. It's not just that he hasn't played, he's supposedly healthy now, and I'm still very worried about going forward. I think I would be if I was rostering Betts on a fantasy team as well. He's getting more rest days than we're used to out of him. But as far as Bellinger and McKinstry goes, Bellinger's going to be in the lineup as long as he's healthy. And I think McKinstry will be as well. Even if Betts was in the lineup, they have Beatty in left field tonight. They, like I said, Pujols at first base where Bellinger can play as well. He can play all over the diamond. That versatility is going to keep him in the lineup. Like you said, we've been talking about this for a couple of weeks, ever since they started hinting of a rehab assignment. And unfortunately, he's 0 for 3 to start off tonight, but I expect good things to come going forward. I think he's going to get the playing time as well.
I have McKinstry a couple places, most notably today when I saw the news he was back. I checked one of my Yahoo leagues where he's in, and Yahoo had put the NA symbol next to his name in that moment between bringing him back from the IL and making him eligible. And I flipped out. I was just like, why? Why would you do this? Why would you do this? And then checked back 20 minutes later. It was gone. I was like, thank God. And he was in the lineup. So I plugged him. What a waste. Way to scare me, Yahoo. I appreciate it.
McKinstry, I'm intrigued by him, man. He just seems like he was made in the lab by the Dodgers for like position flexibility and just doing a little bit of everything. I liked him in the beginning of the season when he had that hot run before he got hurt, and I could see another one coming, especially if, right, like they need to get bets. If that means another IL stint or whatever he needs to get, like they're not hesitant to do things like that and just let McKinstry get some extra playing time and figure out the outfield and go from there. So I could see him getting a decent amount of run here and being a contributor.
All right, Steve, we'll stay in the NL West for this last one for you. Colorado moved Trevor Story to the IL officially. He's missed a couple games. Quick, who benefits the most?
I hope it's Brendan Rodgers. I think this should be finally the time that he gets an extended run and can actually produce. It seems like we've been waiting for this for years now. All the prospect luster is gone basically, but hopefully he can get a decent run here and provide some value. Like we said in the top of the show, we got a lot of home games coming up for Colorado here. So hopefully it gets warm, ball starts flying and falling in that big outfield, and Rodgers can finally cash in on some of that stuff that made him such a hype prospect. I wouldn't be surprised if the Rockies did something to screw up his development. And, I don't know, sign whatever, bring back the court. Yeah, bring back the
still available.
Tulowitzki or something and throw out short. They seem to love to do things like that and just basically stunt all of their nice prospects development. So I hope it's Brendan Rodgers. I don't know if it will be, but that's what I'm hoping.
Well, Rodgers did start both games of the doubleheader today at shortstop, so that's something to hold your hat on a little bit.
Thursday as well. That's what's intriguing to me. They've had 2 doubleheaders in the last 3 days, and he's played both ends of both doubleheaders. So we never know with the Rockies, as Steve said, but it looks like they're going to give him the opportunity.
All right, Kevin, a couple other injuries just popped up today. Jorge Soler in Kansas City and Max Kepler in Minnesota both look like they have some hamstring issues. What effects in each of those lineups do you see, assuming that they both miss at least some time with the day-to-day capacity, if not an IL stint?
Yeah, I think it's like we talked last week with Minnesota. I think this just that Sano entered the game today when Kepler got hurt, which he would be in the lineup many days anyway. And in the outfield now, we're looking at Kirilloff moving out there and Ref Snyder and Larnack. And we talked quite a bit about that last week. And it's Sano definitely playing every day. And those 3 outfielders playing every day. And I poo-pooed Ref Snyder last week, but he has had a very nice week, and it's very intriguing. Several multi-hit games, a 3-for-4 day, a 2-for-4, and a little bit of power, a couple of home runs in the last week. So he, in 15-team leagues, that was another thing we talked about last week. There wasn't a lot of power available without giving up batting average. It was like, we talked about it being almost like a typical mono league season. There just weren't guys available. Usually there's all kinds of power out there, but they hit 220. Now they're Roughneck Odor, and there's all kinds of power out there, not even all kinds, and they hit 180. I'm kind of diving back in and looking more at Ref Snyder after not being interested at all last week.
Well, you're not the only one. He is still 0% rostered across TGFBI. So he is very much available for you to place your bids on this week.
In Kansas City, I was going to talk about this week anyway. Now he may have the opportunity. Still won't be available, as we talked off air. I'm glad you caught me. I didn't know what day of the week it was. But Edward Olivares has been tearing it up in Omaha all season long. And I believe he's got 6 home runs, 7 stolen bases, something along those lines. 5 home runs, 7 stolen bases. OPS of 1.127. So with almost a 400 batting average every night, me being a Royals fan, I have all the Royals beat writers and all the minor league systems as well. And every night it seems like Olivares has been doing something since May 4th when the minor leagues opened their season. Royals fans were already pining for Olivares. Now with this injury to Soler, he was scratched from the lineup in Omaha this evening. So the anticipation is we may see him in Kansas City tomorrow.
I think he leads the
All right,
he leads AAA in OPS too. So obviously that's an impressive number, but it's the best. He has been tearing it up. Definitely agree.
He plays good defense as well, which Soler does not. And I keep harping on this all year. They got to get Soler back to DH. At least now they got a guy that can play right field.
All right, and Steve, I hate to throw. I'm going to throw this on both of you guys because I am throwing it at last second. Some quote unquote breaking news. It won't be breaking by the time everybody listens to this, but it might be breaking to you guys. Though it doesn't really affect your FAAB, I think it's worth talking about just a little bit. Marcell Ozuna was arrested today, though I know he was on the IL. It doesn't really affect their lineup per se. He was charged with aggravated assault, strangulation, and misdemeanor battery, according to Jeff Passan. So I guess the only really question I have is that something like this comes around. Major League Baseball is already opening up an investigation apparently as well. How do you think something like this affects the whole Atlanta lineup and clubhouse? And then is something like this basically make Ozuna a drop where you might have been holding on to him just because he was on the IL in leagues where you don't have IL spots? Obviously you can still, if you want, hold on to him if you have an open availability in your IL slots and say Yahoo and ESPN and what have you. But in an NFBC league where you were just stashing him, hoping for the best as far as health goes, does this make him readily available to be dropped this weekend in FAAB?
Yeah, for me it does. That was the first thing that popped in my head was if I don't have an IL spot for him, you could probably go ahead and drop him now. Major League Baseball still has a long way to go in these types of things, but I think we have seen a little bit shift on the good side of when this happens, we're not going to see him until this plays out. So that, to me, in my mind, that takes till after the end of the season. So yeah, he's a drop for me now.
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially if I don't have an IL spot or if seemingly everyone's hurt. So a lot of people that have IL spots are all filled. So he would be the first one to go. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. MLB has got to get better with how they're handling stuff with this. And I don't think they'll have any hesitation in if whatever he's accused of is actually true, that could be a lengthy absence. I would not be hesitant at all in no IL leagues or where I have a full IL already to move on from Ozuna.
All right. I hate to end it on a note like that, but that's going to do it for our news section of the pod. As always, we do try to keep it focused on news that might affect your FAAB considerations this Sunday, and we may have left out some other important items worth knowing. To stay up to date on all those news and notes, you should be listening to the Daily First Pitch podcast hosted by Nick Pollock during the week and Alex Fass on the weekends. It's 15 minutes full of the most important things that happened in baseball the day before and is a must listen every day to stay up to date, with what's going on across the league, including bullpen adjustments, big time hitter performances, and starting pitching spotlights. Steve was able to do a fun spot start last week with Van. That was great. It was the first time I had heard two people do the First Pitch podcast. So that was a really cool change of pace. And you guys killed it over there. What was it like transferring what you guys are doing on Wins Above Fantasy into this quick form, short form?
Thanks, man. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing it. Shout out to Nick and Alex for letting us do that, have some fun with it. The prep kind of was the same. It was just a little bit, obviously, just narrowed on one day and focus on those news and notes. And with Wins Above Fantasy, like if we go on a topic, we talk about how we can go on for however long we want to talk about it for, right? We just had to trim it down and be mindful, move on and get on to the next topic, which was we had the notes and did some prep to prepare and go through that and have a quick 15-minute show, and listening to that stuff and other short news podcasts like that we have definitely gives us the background. But it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing it, and it was a great time, and it's always a great listen. So yeah, can't recommend that enough if you're a fan of fantasy baseball.
Yeah, and I know that Nick, at least during the week, does it live through the Twitch stream, which I think is twitch.tv/pitcherlist. He's on that all day for the most part, especially when he's doing the lists. But at the very least, I think it's 8:30 to 11 every day during the week, Monday through Friday. Kevin, I know that's part of your daily routine on a regular basis. I don't get a chance to watch the live stream, but I do. The timing for me dropping off my daughter at school works out perfectly, where we drive. I drive her to school. We listen to whatever she wants to listen to, whether it's Little Mermaid soundtrack or whatever it is of the flavor of the week for her.
Just wait till you get to Kids Bop.
I like to say that I can keep that stuff out, but it's like with Spotify and iTunes, like it's not going to be possible.
It's coming.
Not in this day and age. She'll find it. But she gets out, she gets into school, I get back in the car, and by that time, Nick has uploaded the final podcast version of it, and it's perfect. 15 minutes, it gets me home. And so that works out timing wise, works out perfect for me. So definitely must listen to every day if you just want to quick keep up with what's going on there as well. Listen to First Pitch. Steve, what I want to talk to you and Kevin about in our focus topic of the middle of the show here is how do we tell our listeners about how do you keep up with new research throughout the season? A little bit also, of course, in the off season. Everybody has their own different way of doing prep in the off season. Some people like Kevin are crazy and start drafting like the day after the season ends. And that's a great way to prep, to be honest.
Just never stop. You don't have to prep if you never stop.
Exactly. There's drafts going on right now. NFBC is doing their second draft leagues. They had 3 drafts today. And so, yeah, you could just never stop drafting. But all in that, even if you're not drafting, you got to keep up with what's going on in Major League Baseball, with the minors, with prospect research, whatever it is. I'm curious to know, Steve, what do you do, at least in season, to keep up with what's going on, and how do you apply it to your teams, especially when it comes to, deciding on your FAAB bids each week? And give some shout outs to where you're looking at. It doesn't have to be strictly Pitcher List, though. Of course, pitcherlist.com. Check it out. There's a lot of good stuff on there. There's our plug there. And so, Steve, take it away. Where do you get your information, and how are you?
Yeah, pitcherlist.com. It's a pretty good website. I agree. It's definitely different in season for me than off season, right? Like off season, and that's like how the news cycle goes, right? There's always like deep dives and breakdowns and new ways to look at things in the off season. I feel in season, I definitely try to simplify it. Like I try to look at things that I feel and like the industry feels are good in season indicators. Like the biggest one for me, at least for pitchers, is to look at K-BB percentage. Like it's simple, it's easy. There's nothing crazy to it, but I think it's super predictive, and it shows it's predictive because it shows the true talent of what's going on with a guy right now. And it eliminates all the noise of batted ball data, which could be extremely, it could cause for a lot of outliers in between in short samples of a few starts or just a few appearances for relievers. So you're truly getting down to just how that pitcher's skills are for what he can control at the time are doing. So I look at that a lot for pitchers, and I find it to be successful. If you just go to the leaderboard and a name stands out over the last 30 days on the K-BB leaderboard, they're worth a shot in my mind. It's simple, but it's a thing that I like to do for pitching. For hitting, it's a little different. In daily leagues, I again, it's going to sound simple, but I like to find hot bats. Like it led me to Josh Rojas. Like my offense in a lot of leagues has just been brutal, just because the environment and how pitching is dominating and strikeouts are up, and the league batting average is whatever, 225. It's basically the league turned into Rogue Netador, right? It's not fun. But Rojas has saved a few of my teams just because he was a guy I liked in the preseason, got off to an awful start, and then was just hitting. Had a few back-to-back multi-hit games and opportunity because Arizona's not that good and they were banged up. So he's been in the lineup every day and roll with him there. I basically just try to simplify it in season and don't overthink things as far as like analytics or anything goes. Like that's what I use still. Like I'm on Pitcher List, Baseball Savant, Fangraphs 24/7. Like they're always up in every one of my browsers. Sorry if anyone from my real job is listening, but you could probably see a lot of those websites in my history. Regardless,
that's what the incognito window is for.
I guess I got to utilize that a little bit more. But it's things like that I like to do and use, and then like. Just how we were going through players. Is their batting average backed up by their expecting batting average? Is their slug backed up by their expected slugging? Things like that, just to cross-check and see guys. And you're going to find guys who are underperforming based on that too, and take a shot there for trades and things like that. So that's a quick, to quote from Wins of Pub Fantasy, a quick TLDR summary of how I approach things there.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Steve. I talked to you and Van about this, and we talked about it pre-recording. I'm a big fan of that TLDR section you guys do on Wins Above Fantasy, at least during the off-season pods, where you really break down. You're looking for some really good stuff that's happening out there that literally might take somebody 3 days to read. And you break it down in you guys broke it down in a really good way where it's just really easy to listen to, which I'm a big fan of, listening to the information rather than having to go out and write it. Like me personally, I listen to a lot of podcasts, especially in the off season. It's a lot easier to do that in the off season, just because they're far and few between. Not everybody keeps up from October through March, and they just all of a sudden in March, your podcast subscription list just skyrockets. You start seeing them all pop up again. But I liked how you guys really broke those down in an easy to understand way. And hopefully you guys will bring those back at the very least as some really good stuff starts popping up in the industry, probably in closer to the off season, as we have more data to work with. Kevin, do you have any sources that you're willing to divulge? I know that on a regular basis, of course, we always shout out Vlad Sedler for his fab work he's done over the years. But is there any sources out there that you are, I wouldn't say reliant upon, but ones that you trust more than others that you're watching on a regular basis? And we might all have 500 people we're following on Twitter, but in the back of our heads, we are waiting for the handful of Twitter producers out there to put out some good information that we can really lock onto. Who are you relying on the most, especially in season?
I think it's more philosophies, and philosophies isn't the right word. But so for all of last season and the first 6 weeks of this season, I was watching games all day and all evening. I recently went back to work, as a lot of people have been over the past few weeks, few months. And so now I get home and there might be a couple of West Coast games still going. So I frantically start going through the Twitter as I'm sitting down watching the ends of the West Coast games. And as you brought up earlier, Nick, every morning, that fits in my schedule perfect. I flip him on it. For me, I'm in the central time zone, so at 7:30 works out perfect. I can listen to him going through his notes. So maybe a little more when he's doing that live on Twitch, a little more than the 15 minutes that he ends up recording. That's a great one for me. And then, to what Steve said, I'm big for pitchers on K- walk rate. I got that from Saris, right? He's been telling us that for years. Just today, I for hitters, strikeout percentage, and I've been looking at reach rate a lot more closely recently in season. And he brought that up today as a good in-season stat. I guess it would have been yesterday's episode of Rates and Barrels I listened to this morning. Haven't had much time to listen to many podcasts, like you said, in season, and it's been crazy. But that was just hopefully not just confirmation bias. Hopefully it was actually reinforcing something that I'm doing. But it was great to hear him say that, because he's someone I trust. Yeah, there's a few out there. I don't think anyone that off the radar that much. So yeah, I check Twitter out. I check K minus walk rate for pitchers. I check K rate and reach rate for hitters, and just pay attention to what's going on, since haven't been watching as many games over the past couple of weeks as I was earlier in the year.
Yeah, I think that's a important point. Just paying attention. I think that's what I come away with this. And I used the word with you guys rely earlier, and I want to clarify that. And I don't think anybody should be relying on anybody else's knowledge or insight into making their own decisions for their own teams. Trusting is valid, and trusting the opinions. But ultimately, you've got to, and Steve, you touched on this a lot when you're talking about this. You've got to know where you got to be looking to benefit your team. You got to do your own research. You can base that on the advice and the opinions of those across the industry that you trust and that have been putting out good, information and have a good track record in winning their own leagues, perhaps. But ultimately, these are your teams. Like you've got to make these final decisions. We're sitting here every week telling you, hey, keep an eye on this guy, keep an eye on that guy. He might be able to benefit your team, but we're not in your league. Probably we're all in a few leagues, but most likely we're not in most of the leagues of everybody who's listening. And your environment better than anybody you could be reading or listening to. And that's the best advice I can give to anybody is sure, trust who you want to trust based on the information that they're providing, but make sure that you're trusting yourself to make those decisions as well.
Definitely. I agree there. Like each league is different and it's unique. That sounds like a cliche and just not really a piece of advice, but it actually is. We did the last episode of Wins Above Fantasy on trading, which obviously isn't helpful in TGFBI just because there's no trading in an FBC, but knowing your league mates and knowing what they need and what they're looking for is so helpful. And that could be helpful with waiver wire pickups too. Okay, there's someone got dropped that has a speed potential. The guys ahead of me in waiver priority or with more FAAB budget remaining are 1, 2 in steal. So, okay, maybe I could bump down my bid a little bit there. Like looking at things like that are super helpful. And you're only going to know that if you're in that league. Like we don't know that as guys up here recommending players that we like for ads or anything like that. But you're going to if you're paying attention to your league. So things like that are super helpful, especially in season, and how you could utilize this information and make it even more powerful.
Good point, Steve. Yeah. All right. I appreciate your guys' insight on that. So let's get to the meat of the podcast. Why the majority of people listen in, they do want to know who they should be targeting in this FAAB. So going against everything we just said, no, we are going to throw out some names that you guys should at least have on your watch list. And I think we've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. It's always good to build your watch list throughout the week, especially in an NFBC league where you only have one FAAB period on Sundays, but you've got all week to keep an eye on guys that might be making changes. I always say I start my watch list as soon as FAAB ends the week prior. I look at the drop list, and if there's a guy that's interesting that was dropped, there always is at least one. Just you're not bidding on them, just add them to your watch list. And it's really easy to do that, at least in NFBC. I know every format is a little bit different, but pretty much every format has a form of a watch list. Throw them on there. Then throughout the week, keep adding players to it. And then hopefully the names that we're going to throw out here today match a few of those that you've been adding on and gives you some confirmation bias, if nothing else, to your bids. And you feel a little bit more confident in placing those bids to fill your holes. So we'll start off in the power department. Steve, I'm gonna start with you as our guest. Who I know you talked about Jason Vossler a little bit early in the news and notes. Feel free to touch on him a little bit more. I know he's a target of yours this weekend. But is there do you have any other power outlet type of options that you might be thinking about?
Yeah, Vossler has definitely been added to all my watch lists for that power. But another guy that I am keeping an eye on, he was a hot waiver wire ad, and I think you guys talked about him a few weeks ago, is Pavin Smith in Arizona. I think his ownership dipped a bit since that hot little run he had once he started getting everyday playing time, but he's starting to heat up again. He's had 4 straight multi-hit games. He's on an 8-game hit streak entering into Saturday night's game. And the StatCast page is super impressive. He's got an 80% hard hit rate, a 80 percentile hard hit rate, and a 92nd percentile on whiff rate. So he can provide some of that power without basically Rougned Odoring you and striking out in all of his other at-bats. And he's getting a little unlucky in the power department. He's 75th in xWOBA and xSlug. So I think there's some more power potential to be tapped into. Maybe if he gets a few games in cores and the weather starts to heat up in a few of the road games he's at. And Arizona hasn't been that bad of a hitter environment, despite the fact that they had the humidor added a few weeks ago. And he's got some prospect pedigree. He was the 7th overall pick in the 2017 drafts. There's a lot to like in Pavin Smith's package. And if you need some power there, if he was dropped, definitely someone that I'm keeping an eye on, looking to add back in a few leagues.
Yeah, I'm a big Pavin Smith fan and believer myself as well. So I like the call out there, especially in your shallower leagues where he's still readily available. As you mentioned, 21% rostered across Yahoo, though he is available at least in one TGFBI league. Should be bid on there, especially with Arizona having a 7-game slate next week as well. He does have Arizona has 2 days off the following week, so just something to look at as far as your lineup construction goes with holding onto Arizona bats moving forward, looking ahead. Kevin, anybody else that you might be targeting in the power department?
Yeah, there's a couple of guys I was looking at this week. We talked the last couple of episodes about as deep as the shortstop position was in draft season, they're all rostered, and it's been tough if you needed a shortstop. And I always say I like the boring old guys, and some of the boring old guys are having career years. Brandon Crawford, for one, we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and now Freddie Galvis is doing the same thing. He's 85% rostered TGFBI, but only 14% rostered Yahoo. That's the 2 home runs today. I give him 5 in the last couple of weeks, 9 on the season. When these old guys get hot, I'd ride them. And Joey Votto took batting practice yesterday. So we don't know how long it's going to be before he goes out on a rehab assignment. All they say is June. June is Tuesday, but June is also 30 days long. But I'm keeping an eye on that because Votto was more aggressive early in the season before the injury. So hopefully that translates in the power department. And he's been held on to in a lot of leagues, but only 68% of them TGFBI, far less, of course, in Yahoo. So he's available in some 15-teamers and probably most 12-teamers and less.
All right, I unmuted myself this time. Nope, none of our listeners are going to know this. I have a tendency to not unmute myself because I edit all those mistakes out later. I mostly mute myself because there is a small amateur speedway 3 blocks away from my house, and so not sure if that's coming through on my mic or not. But I do try to block that out. And I do live in Indianapolis, so it is race weekends with the Indianapolis 500 happening on Monday. So it's in the air, if you will. I am not from the area originally, so I haven't caught the fever, but it's definitely out there. The only shout out I want to give in this area is Willie Calhoun, who is readily available in shallow leagues such across Yahoo. He's 12% roster in Yahoo. He's fully rostered in TGFBI, so probably not available in your deeper formats, 15-teamers and what have you. But I'll just point out the fact that Texas does go to Colorado in a rare visit across the NL, and just they happen to head to Denver. So that's a great opportunity there. I also did give Willie Calhoun specifically a shout out in my speed article as we segue over to that section. And if there's an opportunity for Willie Calhoun to get his first major league stolen base, it's with Texas in Colorado. So I'm crossing my fingers on that one. If they can get 4 stolen bases out of Nate Lowe, I think the Rangers might be able to get at least 1 out of Calhoun. He did leg out a triple, his yearly triple the other day. So he can do it. I'm not super confident he will, but at the very least, he's going to Colorado. He's a good pickup. And for the power alone, he plays plenty of outfield. So he's not a DH guy who's going to lose the playing time going into the NL Park as well. 12% roster in Yahoo, readily available. Keep an eye on that. And pretty much anybody on the Texas roster that might be available in your leagues as they head to face the Rockies in Colorado. All right, like I said, we're segueing over to our speed department. I mentioned John Birdie early in the show. He's playing every day in Miami with all those injuries, especially Brian Anderson. He's been playing third base pretty much every day. He did play one game in center field, but now with Marte back in the outfield and Duvall looking like he's going to be okay in the outfield, he'll probably stay in the infield dirt. So I think even though he's batting less than 200, he might hurt you other places, but he stole 2 bases last week. He's still readily available in a lot of different leagues, including some 15-teamers. So definitely a speed option there to stream, if nothing else, as he continues to get everyday playing time. And he has some good matchups coming up, placing Baltimore and Pittsburgh, I believe. Yep. And Jacob Stallings, 17 stolen bases allowed. It's one of the high 18% caught stealing rates, one of the highest in the major. So that's my target there. Steve, any speedsters that catch your eye for this coming week?
I'm always looking out for steals. It's a category that I'm always lacking in. And a guy that kind of caught my eye, he's not really like an everyday starter or anything like that, but he's quietly got 7 stolen bases, and that's Brett Phillips in Tampa Bay. Again, he might not be starting every night, but if you're in a deeper league like TGFBI or a 15-team league or deeper, you might just want to add him and throw him in and hope for 1 or 2 steals during the week, even if he doesn't get any starts or anything like that. He's not going to help you like anywhere else, really. He does have 2 home runs, but he gets on base at a decent clip. Like it's a 313 OBP, which is good for a guy that, you know, is basically just there to steal bases. So it's deep. It's not really going to help you anywhere else. But Brett Phillips, if you're really hurting for stolen bases, is someone I like this week.
He's been playing somewhat regularly as well in the last couple of days, at least, both Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So, yeah, definitely. I think Tampa has a way of letting guys who are going to produce find ways into the lineup as well. So if he's going to help them, he will get some time. Evan, any speedsters, or are you just going to pass it off onto me, as you've said in the past, or do you have anybody else in mind that I didn't talk about?
Well, until the Soler injury, this is where I was going to bring up Olivares, and now it may be more imminent. He's 7 out of 8 on the year, 473 on base percentage. That brings opportunities. They have 6 games at home this week, Kauffman Stadium. Todd Zola brings this up all the time. Kauffman Stadium depresses home runs. It's a top 5 ballpark for hits and runs. So it's a great environment for someone like Olivares, get on base. And we know the Royals like to run. So if indeed he is going to be called up tomorrow, as many are anticipating with him scratched tonight, in FBC, he won't be available. But other leagues, grab him up this week, and I'd put him right in my lineup in a league where he's available if he does indeed get the call tomorrow.
Where do you see Olivares slotting into the Kansas City lineup once he's up?
Probably about that 6 or 7 spot where they had dropped Soler to until they kicked him back up to the cleanup spot today. They had dropped him down for a couple of games. I would think on the days that it wouldn't matter whether it's Nicky Lopez or Alberto playing second base. I think he would hit above them. So right behind the Hunter Dozier and ahead of Lopez or Alberto in about that 7 spot.
Good to know. Good to know. All right. We're talking about some opportunity for some guys coming up, whether they are a new prospect with new opportunity or on a roster or on a team that's going to see a bunch of games. I will point out, I believe the White Sox have 8 games next week, Cleveland as well. They have a doubleheader on Monday. So something to keep an eye out there in a general sense. If you're looking for a couple extra at-bats in those areas, I think most of the best players on the White Sox are probably rostered in most leagues, but I think that there's plenty of guys on the Cleveland side on that Monday doubleheader that might be readily available, whether they be the Cesar Hernandez's or even the Josh Naylors of the world. So keep an eye on those options in your leagues. Steve, do you see anybody else that has some good opportunity, whether it be a full 7-game slate, added position flexibility, or just overall good matchups? Like I said, Texas moving to Colorado this coming week, it's going to have my eye. Anybody else? That
a guy that I'm looking at, it's been talked about a lot this week. It was on Rates and Barrels, and I saw a few other guys write about it. But Willy Adames, now that he's out of Tropicana and in Milwaukee, I'm still going to call it Miller Park. I know it's now American. Yeah. American,
you get no arguments from me.
That will always be Miller Park for me. How can the Brewers play in a stadium that's not named after a beer. But regardless of my quib there, but this is talked about a lot. At Tropicana, Willie Adames' career slash line was 222, 279, 348 with a 79 WRC plus. On the road, he was 293, 366, 498 with a 130 WRC plus. Obviously, you can't just say he's going to be a 130 WRC plus player and be one of the best players in the league and turn into peak Francisco Lindor or anything like that. But it definitely should help his overall numbers, and just the fact that he gets away from Tropicana and into one of the best stadiums to hit in as a Brewer, I'm really intrigued. So he's someone that I think is going to be out there in shallow leagues. It's only 16% in Yahoo. He's mostly rostered up in TGFBI, 95% there. But he should be out there, and like Kevin hinted on before, like the shortstop isn't as deep as we expected at this point now, especially with some of the bigger names going down. He's a perfect Trevor Story replacement, I think, in the shallow league. So someone that I'm keeping an eye on in that new environment in Miller Park.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning as well. He's batted second the last couple of games as well. He moved up in the order for the Brewers, and he's hitting the ball. He's doing well. He's putting up good numbers. And I mentioned this as well on with Justin Mason earlier in the week. He may have seemed sad to leave, but he sure looks happy at the plate right now where he's at. Definitely, I like the call out there. Kevin, anybody else fit this category for you?
Yeah, I think you hit it when you brought up Cleveland, and he's still 98% rostered TGFBI. He's not out there in deep leagues, but he's 10% rostered in Yahoo, and that's Ahmed Rosario. He started off so horribly, everybody dropped him, and I don't think people have noticed that he's come around. His stat line for the season, 2 home runs, 4 stolen bases, I think 11 RBIs, 19 runs, something like that. He's got most of that in the last 30 days. 9 out of 11 of the RBIs, 14 out of the 19 runs. Half of that just in the last couple of weeks, and he's had a great last week, going 8 for 24 over the last week. He's got his season-long average up to 239. It's 252 over the last month. He's hitting. He's playing shortstop again. Maybe that's got something to do with it. But he's hitting enough that he's not going to suffer the same fate that Jimenez did. He's going to stay in the lineup. So with the 8-game on tap for Cleveland this week, Ahmed Rosario, I think, is viable even in those 12-teamers where he's only 10% rostered.
That's good. That's targeting Cleveland bats in my daily league is one of the my goals for this coming week in my head-to-head league. And so I was debating between a couple of guys because, like I mentioned, most of the good White Sox players are already rostered. And so it was between Josh Naylor, Rosario, Cesar Hernandez, and even actually Miller was already picked up. So I'm glad to get the push in that direction from you, Kevin. I appreciate it. I was glad somebody brought up somebody because I didn't want to, because I was hoping somebody else.
I have Josh Naylor, but he hasn't been performing as well recently as Rosario.
All right. That's going to do it for our bats. Of course, if there's any other names that you think we should have talked about, talk to us via the Twitter at OnTheWirePod. And let us know who the guys you are targeting on the batting side. And we'll hit our pitchers up next. We'll start off with the wins and Ks, guys that might have 2 starts. They might vulture win as a follower, if you can see that coming from far away, or just have a really good single matchup coming up, whether it be on Wednesday or Thursday. Kevin, I'm going to stick with you. Who are some of the starters or pitchers in general you think could add to your wins and K column in your leagues?
At least one, and I feel like I'm a week behind on this, but I believe, I didn't write it down, but I believe he's still only 50% rostered in TGFBI, slated for a 2-start week this week, and I believe he is still getting that second start tomorrow, but it's more rest of season. Brad Keller had a lot of hype coming into the season. He had a new pitch. He performed well last year, and he, like Rosario, like Josh Rojas, as Steve brought up earlier, these guys that they did not perform early in the year. But over his last seven starts, Brad Keller has been what we were hoping he would be this season. And it goes back to a lot of what we liked from him last season was due to his increased slider usage. For some reason, he went away from that for the first month of this season, but it's back. He's brought his slider usage back up, and he's getting the results that we saw last season. So Brad Keller, for sure. He had the 2 starts this week, so I feel like I'm a little behind, but he's still available out there.
Yeah, 51% rostered across TGFBI, like you said. So just under half of the leagues there, and there are 29 leagues there, probably right around the 15 or 14 team mark. Will be lucky enough to bring him on board if they so choose. Steve, any targets of yours this coming week for pitchers that might bring your team an extra win or two and rack up?
This is in the same vein as what Kevin brought up with a guy that kind of underperformed. He might not have had the hype that Brad Keller did. I know everyone loved Brad Keller's seam shifted wake heading into the season, but it's Merrill Kelly. He's quietly been pretty awesome. He got rocked in 2 starts. One was at Colorado and at Washington early in the season, where we gave up 6 earned runs in each. But since then, he hasn't given up more than 3 earned runs since April 15th. And one of those starts was a 3-run game versus the Dodgers last week, where he had 12 strikeouts across 7 innings. So you'll take that. And he also hasn't walked anyone in his last 2 starts. And that was at the Dodgers, where he had the 12 Ks, and then versus the Giants this past week, where he had 6 strikeouts. So he's got a 2-start week coming up this week. He's probably going to be a pretty popular ad if he's not rostered already. Versus the Mets, I know they're laying a smackdown on the Braves tonight, putting up 13 runs so far, but their offense is bagged up and not really anyone that I'm super afraid of. And then at Milwaukee. So 2 pretty good starts. I know it's not a great park, but Milwaukee does strike out quite a bit. And Kelly's been hot. I know I liked Kelly when he came over and had a decent run after he came back. I believe he was in the KBO for a year or two, and was one of those guys that worked on his repertoire and pitch mix over there. And there was some results at first, but it looks like he's getting back on track, and someone that I'm definitely looking to pick up pretty much in 12 team or deeper. I love that 2-step this week. I'd be adding him pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, I like to just give a shout out to pretty much any pitcher facing the Mets in the foreseeable future, regardless of what's happening right now. As you mentioned, Steve, anytime a major league pitcher can face a AAA team or even quadruple A team, you want to take that every 99 times out of 100. So good matchups for Kelly there as well. So good call out there. So let's get ahead of ourselves a little bit. Scroll down a little bit on the show notes here. We're going to look ahead to the following week for a couple guys that are currently, and I stress currently, lined up to get 2 starts the week of June 8th. So if you have the flexibility to roster a guy for an extra week that would ultimately end up being a streamer for you, this is the time to do it. As we talk about most weeks, you're going to save yourself a little bit of coin as well. And as a good number of teams are trying to scrimp and save their FAAB, and they might have spent a little bit too much, as we talked about last week, or they just see that there's a long road ahead. You want to do whatever you can to save up and make sure you have enough cash for the hammer if you want to place the hammer on that FAAB-a-Palooza bid, or just want to make sure you're getting those guys that are going to help your ratios. Kevin talked about this last week. It's time to start checking your categories. And so you need to know who your targets are going to be and make sure you have enough FAAB. So one way to do it is to grab those volume guys early and often. I put a list together of these guys that are going to get 2 starts starting June 8th that you might be able to get a little bit cheaper this week. Steve, start with you. Give me at least 1, if not 2 of these guys that you think you'd be targeting this week, and then let me know whether or not you think you'd sit them this week and just start them for their 2-stop spot, or you think you might start them for all 3 and get as much out of them.
I'm not just reading off the list because I like the first 2 guys that you put down, and that's Ryan Weathers and Albert Alzolay. The matchups aren't the greatest, but I probably would be starting them in all 3 spots. Weathers is at Chicago, home versus the Cubs, home versus the Cubs again, and then at the Mets. Weathers has been really good. The only issue is that you might not get any wins because they've been letting him go 3 or 4. I don't know if they're going to stretch him out now that they're starting Lamet and he actually got a traditional start. Maybe they'll go like 6-man or something like that for a little to spare him there. But Weathers has been quietly really good. And the only issue, like I said, is the fact that he might not get a win and they might not let him go very far. The Cubs have been pretty good, though, so it's not the greatest matchup, but I would definitely be starting him at least that second week, and maybe the first week check the wind in Wrigley, see if it's blowing in. Maybe it'll be a bit better for the pitchers there. He looks like he's going up or slated to go up against Weathers, or at least pitch in the same series versus San Diego, at San Diego, and that versus St. Louis. Again, not the greatest matchups, but I really Gesuele. I think he should be rostered basically pretty much everywhere. I'm shocked by his ownership percentage. I think it probably has to do with the fact that he was running an ERA like above 4. I know that came down with his last good start and nice run here, but he's striking people out over a batter an inning, and he's basically just stopped walking guys. I think it's below 2 walks per 9, which was always his issue coming up. Like, he always had the stuff, always looked great in the minors, struck a lot of guys out, but always walk guys. Now that he's not doing that, I really was like, not only just as a 2-start, but a long-term play too. I think he has a decent amount of upside, and I would be looking to add him for these next 2 weeks and beyond. And I'm not the greatest to ask because I'm the kind of manager that starts everybody. If I roster a guy, like if I'm not starting you unless it's like Coors or something, I'm probably going to start you. I lean towards that side, and I guess I face a few more bluffs because of it, but I really Gesuele would be starting him in all of those spots despite the fact that he's playing the Padres twice.
Yeah, I can see myself starting Gesuele pretty much everywhere. I've got Weathers. I think he's in my TGFBI league. So in an NFB format, I have benched him a couple times just because the rest of my rotation has been healthy, and I see them as giving me more of an availability of wins there. Give the man a opener, please. Just give the man an opener, and everything will be okay. That won't happen because arbitration and all that. But so I'm going to come back to you, Steve, in a second to ask your fade, at least one fade off this list. But Kevin, going to you too, can you give me 1 or 2 other guys on this list that you might be interested, if any?
Yeah, there's a couple that I like for sure. I've talked about too many Royals tonight, but Chris Bubik, he's going back to his final 7 or 8 starts of last year, and every start that he's made this season, 2 earned runs or less in each start. So, and we talked about him last week for this week, and he had another good outing, 1 earned run in 6 innings at Minnesota. And the other one is another guy like Brad Carroll, like Merrill Kelly, had a lot of talk going into this season, especially in the pitcher list community. Zach Davies, I don't think people realize how good he's been recently. 2 starts back, he did give up 3 earned runs to the Nationals, but 4 of the past 5, it's been 0 or 1 earned run in 4 of his past 5 starts. We know we're not getting strikeouts from him, but if he's going to go out there, give up 0-1s run, give us 5 or 6 good innings, he gets a start at San Francisco this week, I would definitely do that. And then I would go for that 2-step at San Diego and back home versus the Cardinals. Have been swinging a better bat recently, but it's all about that quality of contact or lack thereof that Zach Davies gives up. That's what we were talking about earlier in the off season. And now it seems after that rough start, that's exactly what's happening.
All right, Kevin, I'll stick with you then. Let's get your fade on this list as well. Put it to people. Put it to a pitcher that you think is going to be a popular bid that you're just going to be completely out on.
Does it count that I know I'm not going to bid enough to get Alek Manoah? I'm going to bid on him. I was just setting that up.
I expected that to be your answer.
I thought that's what
we
you
haven't
were
talked
asking
about him the entire episode yet. This was my way.
I'm going to have bids on him, but I'm not going to have. He's not going to be on my roster on Monday morning. We know that.
Yeah, I got a claim in for him in a league where we use waiver claims instead of FAAB. And I think in a 12-team league, I think I have the 9th or 10th waiver priority. And I I texted a buddy of mine. I'm like, hey, you have a claim in for Manoah? He's like, yeah. I'm like, all right, cool. I can cancel my claim. I appreciate it. Thanks for the heads up. I'm not wasting my time on that. All right, Steve, do you have, besides Manoah, actually, what, Steve, are you going to be heavy in on Manoah? Is this a Fabapalooza type of bid for you, or is this not somebody that you're going to be spending a lot of change to bring on?
I'm definitely interested in him. I probably am not going to break the bank, so I would be surprised if he's on any of my teams. In a few of my leagues where there's like minor spots, like I was definitely interested in him and would have stashed him earlier if I could have, but didn't get him in many spots there. But I'm same sort of thing as Kevin. Like I tend to break the bank on batters if they come up and look like they could be impact bats. Pitching prospects, I'm a firm believer in tin snap. That is, there's no such thing as a pitching prospect. Despite the fact that Manoah looked great, the Yankees lineup isn't at full strength, and I could see toying with his innings later on. I think he only had 29 or something professional innings. I know he was a college guy, so it's a bit different there, but I'm not going to spend 100% of my budget or anything like that to make sure he's on any of my rosters. But I'll definitely I always put in a decent, keep him honest bid. We're not saying do not bid on Manoah. Put in a decent amount, something that you think is reasonable, because who knows? Like we said before, it's a holiday weekend. Things sometimes go under the radar, and people might just assume that he's been added or something like that too. That's always a key with waivers. It sounds simple, but check to make sure. You're sometimes surprised with guys that are out there, especially in weekly leagues and things like that.
He will definitely go in at least one league for just $1. Mm-hmm. Like, it will happen. Like, you look through those ad drop lists on NFBC, and you always see guys that are going for $130 in a max bid in a $1 min bid. So he was good enough to go for triple digits somewhere, but also not good enough to just sneak by for $1. So it's always interesting. The one little tiny tidbit I'll add in about Manoah, it's interesting that his next start is going to come against Miami, which obviously is a good matchup, especially they're beat up a little bit on top of just not being that great of a lineup in general. But he also gets them in one of their first games in Buffalo as the Blue Jays move from Dunedin up north to Buffalo, which was Manoah's home park just a week ago. So he gets a true home start in a very much more familiar place, though he only had 3 starts at AAA. And I believe at least one of them came on the road in Worcester against the Red Sox AAA team, where he struck out double digits. And he played that team twice and struck out double digits on both of those accounts. I'll be watching the bid results across different leagues to see what Manoah goes for. In the leagues where I need the strikeouts and I need to make some strides there, as Kevin, you mentioned last week, it's time to watch your categories. I think Manoah's a guy I'm going to be bidding a decent amount on. I don't know that I'll go more than like 100, like more than 10% of my original FAAB. I'm not quite sure if I'll go triple digits, but I think I'm going to have to if I want them.
It's time to do that if you need somebody. Yeah.
If you still got it. If you still
one of my leagues, NFBC leagues, 13 of the 15 teams have $540 or less remaining. And it's really clustered. So it's almost like the 2 teams can get whoever they want if they'd like, but everybody else is like starting over. We're all at around $500. So It's interesting.
It's always good to know where your league mates are at. Make sure keeping tabs on that, like we talked about earlier in the episode. Steve, who would be your fade then on this list that you think is going to be a little bit?
Probably Marco Gonzalez. I wouldn't rush to add him back if he got dropped, and I know he had a lengthy IL stint. As Nick likes to say, I think it's definitely a still ill situation, despite the fact that he's got 2 juicy matchups. I would definitely in the second and 2-start week at Detroit and at Cleveland. He's got Oakland this week. If anything, like I would add him and not start him versus Oakland, see how that start goes. That could be a savvy move, especially with those 2 juicy matchups. I'm talking myself into not fading him now, strangely. So sorry. But for this week, at least, I would fade Marco Gonzalez, see how that start goes. And then if he looks good, like the pitch counts up and everything's good there. I know he had a rocky start too, and he could have been like the thing like Kevin was saying. These guys that we dropped and had these slow starts, like people, they're it's like out of sight, out of mind thing, like Rosario, Keller. Now Gonzalez, like it could sort of be the same thing, but it's just something to keep in mind. I would not start him versus Oakland at the very least there, though.
Yeah, I think that's a good fade there. It is worth noting, of course, he is on Seattle, so there's always a possibility he doesn't get those 2 starts because of the 6-man rotation that they have. I did plug him in here just in case because of those matchups look so nice. He is set to start on Tuesday as well, so it's if there's a chance that he gets the 2 starts, it's this coming week, just because he should be guaranteed to get that Monday start for Seattle. If there's an opportunity, there it is. Like you said, those matchups against at Detroit and at Cleveland, you got to at least look at those. It's like we talked about Austin Gomber last week. No matter how much he hurt you in the last 2-step, it was hard not to look at him this past week just because those matchups so good. Mets, Pittsburgh, and obviously those worked out okay. All right, we'll move back into this current week, looking at probably some reliever guys, maybe some long reliever guys that are going to help your ratios, your ERA, your WHIP, chip away at that. It's never too early to find ways to chip away at those, and then blending into the back of the bullpen's save opportunities. Steve, looking at you first in your ratio department, could be a starter that we haven't talked about. Most of the time, this runs into our long relief options for those who don't mind rostering those guys. It can help your ERA and your WHIP, guys that might have some good opportunity. Who do you like for this coming week?
He was used as an opener in his last starter, so that kind of counts as a long reliever. It's Ross Stripling again. This sort of fits into that guys that we were frustrated by earlier in the season and dropped. He was pretty bad, but he was really good in that last start versus the Rays, where he was used as an opener. He went 7 innings, 7 Ks, 2 hits, 2 walks as that follower. And he had a 34% CSW and a 41% CSW on his fastball. So the called strike plus whiffs. Not that I need to explain that on a pitcherless podcast, but he is someone that I am looking to add. He was supposed to start today, but they got rained out versus the Indians. I'm assuming he'll go tomorrow. So that's a juicy matchup. And if he's a streamer in any daily leagues, that's a nice add there. But he's only 17% rostered in TGFBI, 4% in Yahoo. So this is exactly that mold, right? Like people were done with him and couldn't, it's easy to forget and miss that last start because it was probably a matchup that you didn't want to avoid, that you wanted to avoid versus the Rays. But another interesting thing, he actually talked about making changes to his delivery. He felt like he was tipping pitches and he was like moving his arms before he was making a motion to the plate, and he just made what he said was a drastic change and is just leaving his arms at his side before the pitch. So things like that I always pique my interest, especially with starters. Like if he was tipping and it was something that was causing him issues, like it's easy to forget how awesome Ross Stripling was when the Dodgers actually started him just a few years ago. Someone that I'm keeping an eye on and looking to add back as a potential starter this week and next.
Is it wrong that what I really got out of that was a reminder that the game today was postponed, which I totally blanked on that, and the fact that I now realize Cleveland has back-to-back doubleheaders scheduled, and now all I'm doing is eyeing all the hitters that I was going to add Monday today. So thank you for that, though Ross Stripling also a very good call out in that regard. Kevin, any ratio busters or non-busters, guys that are going to help your ratios that you might be eyeing for this coming week?
This is another guy that I don't know if people realize how good he's been, because he's not getting saves and he's not a starter. He does have a save, but Brian Shaw was awesome in Cleveland. And then he got all that money that season that Colorado decided to give like $100 million to 3 relievers. And he was horrible and went back to Cleveland and was so last season. And now he's been awesome this year. And I think he hasn't, the thing is, he can't help your ratios a whole lot because he's only throwing an inning at a time. I think he's got 2 or 3 inning and a third, but he's getting at least 1 strikeout each time out there, lots of times 2. He's somebody to throw in there if you're really in a pinch, and he's 3% rostered in Yahoo. So probably the 3% of Yahoo leagues that count holds. But Brian Shaw has been really good.
All right, you're here. Some good relievers to keep an eye out there, or starters in the case of Ross Stripling, technically. We'll see how long he goes to chip away at those ratios. Again, I've said it a couple times just to echo what Kevin said last week. Like, chipping away at certain categories is something you need to start doing now as categories and standings start to solidify right around Memorial Day weekend. We'll go to everybody's favorite category, our final specific category of the pod, and that is, of course, saves. We talked about the Kansas City bullpen options a little bit earlier in the show, but you know what? We got the Royals fans take on that earlier. So, Steve, I'm going to reach over to you. What are you looking at as far as the Kansas City bullpen goes, and who do you like to come out of?
I'm not a Royals fan per se, but I did have Stalmont in a lot of leagues, so I was very privy to this situation. And the guy that I added, I think I said it earlier on the show, was Kyle Zimmer. He seemed like Kevin said before, Stalmont wasn't as good once he was given the role, and Zimmer was probably the best arm in that bullpen. I think him and Barlow. So those are the two names that jumped out to me the most. But that game on Thursday, like Kevin said, was really telling. It wasn't a save situation, but the save situation in the game was when Zimmer was used. So that exactly. Was super telling. The bases were loaded. He got out of it. I think he only let one runner score in a bases loaded 1 out situation, or there might have even been no outs. I forget, but he's looked good. And it's the kind of thing where if he gets 3 saves this week and just looks comfortable in the role, like that could be it. Even when Stalmont comes back, if it's just a minimum stint, like Zimmer could run with this job. That's the sort of situation. I think Matheny said like he changed and is open to the idea of using a committee, but it still seems like he likes having one guy. Stalmont was that one guy, and I think Zimmer probably can be it if he takes this opportunity and runs with it. So that's who I would be bidding on and adding if I needed saves this week. He would be the number 1 reliever in my queue for saves for sure.
Yeah, Zimmer available, like you said, across the board in TGFBI, very minimally rostered in Yahoo. We're reaching the time of year as well, though, where as teams start looking at their specific categories, we start seeing some decent closers getting dropped from those teams that they went early in the draft and they got 1 or 2 solid guys that have worked out, and they got lucky maybe with a 3rd and a 4th closer. And I know I'm in one league where I'm a good 4 saves ahead in the category above the second place team in saves. And so I'm starting to think about when it is I'm going to start actually dropping a solid closer, even if it's like a Richard Rodriguez in Pittsburgh, assuming he's going to end up being traded.
Careful, Toby will get upset.
I know. We went through that. I haven't dropped him yet. Don't worry, Toby. But it's probably the only league in that situation. But there's other teams. I see it every week. There's a good or decent closer being dropped in the last couple of weeks. Kevin, my question to you, I'm just kind of throwing this at you last seconds. When should teams that are in this specific situation start considering like, hey, it's okay to start dropping and making room on your roster for players that can help you in other categories that you need, an extra starter? I think we talked about this in a preseason podcast about the beauty of having 1 or 2 really solid closers in your lineup is that it gives you the ability to stream an extra pitcher, get those extra counting stats, or even volume your way across Ks and wins. But when do you decide to do that if you're in that situation?
I think it's a little early unless you're in trouble elsewhere. Tons of guys on the IL. If you really need a spot, you might have to consider it. I think that would be my last resort to get the spot I need, especially for the save category, because those guys turn over so often, and because an injury, a lost opportunity, a team goes on a losing streak, whatever, depth is great to have. However, it comes to a point where, who are you dropping right now? Your 4th closer or Mike Trout, if it comes down to that.
Yeah, if you've got the IL players that you need to hold on to, if you got the Trouts, Bellinger just came off the IL, but he was on there for a while. You've got to make those tough decisions. That's a great point. All right. Are there any other bullpens, Kevin, that you're looking at? I know you're probably not at a point where you are stashing for the sake of stashing, or at least not replacing your stashes with different stashes. But has any bullpen situation arise that has caught your eye worth talking about?
Yeah, unfortunately, they haven't had enough opportunities recently to get a real good eye on it, but it appears that Lucas Sims is back in favor in Cincinnati, and he was dropped in a lot of places. He was popular for this reason 6 weeks ago, and now he's available in some spots. But you have to go back a full 2 weeks ago to go 2 saves back for Cincinnati. Lucas Sims got the last one. I think it was May 16th, and Antone got that one. A lot of us wanted it to be Antone. I think he may get a save here and there. Amir Garrett is still in the picture, but it appears that Lucas Sims might be starting to take hold of that spot. And a lot of people thought that's how it was going to turn out, but a lot of people gave up on it as well.
All right, good call out there. We'll move into our last category. This is basically our wild card section, players that we just didn't have a chance to talk to. Maybe they don't fit specifically into one of the categories, but we think is worth keeping an eye out. Steve, anybody else that you want to talk about basically that we haven't had a chance to mention, or are you good at
There's no better time to ask than a Royals fan that's on top of all their prospects, but I guess I'll throw a question to Kevin, and it's just a guy that I've watched all season, and he's been great in AAA, and that's Jackson Kowar. Do you think that the Royals will call him up anytime soon? He's been great in pretty much every start. I know they called up the big prospect that they called up recently, and it wasn't great. I'm blanking on Daniel Lynch. Yeah. So it shows that they're willing to call up their prospects. I know Kowar's kind of like probably ahead on most lists, but do you think that could happen anytime soon? I think he pitched last night on Friday and was really good again, and has been all year, but it might be coming to the time where could get some run in the big league rotation if they need the spot.
Yeah, I think it's going to happen sometime relatively soon, sometime over the next 3-4 weeks. There was a lot of speculation that it may have happened today, but then he did pitch for Omaha last night, as you said, but it was another great outing, 5 scoreless innings, I think. I think he's 5, maybe even 6-0 now on the year. Not that wins at AAA are a huge deal, but it does let us know that he is throwing innings and going deep into games. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, probably somewhat soon. There was a lot of speculation. It may have been today. Didn't turn out being that way. They actually moved his start up. He was scheduled to start for Omaha today, Saturday, as we're recording here. And they moved him up to Friday night, which was really interesting when there was speculation. They left today's starter in Kansas City open until the very last minute before they announced who'd be starting today's game. So it was an interesting couple of days. A lot of people were hoping it would have been him today in Kansas City. But as you said, they've done it. They've done it all year. They brought Bubic back up, who had been up last season. They've done it with Lynch. They did it with Singer and Bubic last season. Yeah, I think we're going to see Kowar.
So when everyone's spending their money on Manoah, you might be able to sneak in and get Kowar for $1 or $2 this week.
Yeah, in non-NFBC leagues, absolutely.
Kevin, do you think that the fact that Kowar is not on the 40-man roster plays a role into keeping him down a little bit longer and having to make that roster move, or do you think the Royals are just past looking at that?
No, I think that may have played a huge part into it not happening this weekend. But to your point, they have figured out, or have over the past couple of seasons figured out what they needed to do to make those adjustments. So I don't think that will keep him down the entire season. But yeah, for this weekend, I think it definitely played a role.
Yeah, I think that plays a big part into why, say, something like Taylor Walls was called up for the Rays over Vidal Brujan, or of course Wander Franco. Wander Franco not being on the 40-man roster, Walls obviously is. So not a huge surprise there. keep an eye on those when you're looking at prospects on your teams or just across the league that you think might be calling up. Being on that 40-man roster makes a big difference, just as far as the ease of bringing them up to the major league roster, not having to move somebody on to, say, the 60-day IL or DFAing a player or something like that. Kevin, any other wild card players you want to shed some light on that we haven't had a chance to talk about in any of the specific categories?
I think once again, based on what happened with Soler today, this is, again, I would have talked about, I had Olivares in this spot. I'm pretty excited as a Royals fan that this may actually be happening tomorrow. I liked him from the beginning. Justin Mason and I, in a couple of those October, November drafts, were drafting holds. And when he started getting into the 40s, I think I got him in one league, but he got him in the other. And we DM'd back and forth a little bit. He was supposed to leave him for me, but he likes him too. So we liked this guy before he started tearing it up at AAA this season. And I liked him when he was in San Diego. So pretty excited if this comes to pass.
Cool. The other thing when we talk about with prospects, looking ahead, when you're trying to stash your prospects, talk about guys that are on the 40-man roster or not. Something that, Kevin, you brought to light to me earlier in the week is that there's a couple of prospects out there that are set to be on their Olympic team rosters. So any names on there that are worth mentioning that you looked into for our listeners to keep an eye out and maybe pump the brakes on whether or not they might get called up soon and maybe not until late summer?
Yeah, a friend of mine, Douglas Boyle, he's Urban Baboon on Twitter. He brought this up in regards to Julio Rodriguez being on the Dominican Republic Olympic qualifying roster. And then a couple of days later at Roto Clegg from Fantrax, of course, prospect, one of their great prospect guys, brought it up with Duran, who has got a lot of talk recently about when's he going to come up.
Including in this podcast.
Right. And Casas is on that roster as well. Liberatore is on that roster. Now, there's only going to be 6 national teams in the Olympics at the end of July and early August, and 4 of them are set. This is really interesting. I didn't know. I knew we were going to get the Olympics this year. I knew we were going to have Olympic baseball. I didn't know a whole lot about it till I started digging into this because of these couple of mentions that came up. Really interesting. First of all, we have a tournament starting Monday, Tournament of the Americas, that the winner of that tournament becomes the 5th qualifier. If you don't win that tournament, you're not out, but you've got to go on to qualify for the last spot. This has got Dominican Republic. This has got USA. They're not those 4 teams. The 4 teams that are in so far are Japan, Korea, Mexico, and Israel. So not only do we need to pay attention to these teams as far as the guys on their rosters probably aren't getting called up until the Olympics end, which is like mid-August or August 7th, I believe, July 28th to August 7th. So it's going to be a while. But the other side of this is we're going to have some nice baseball to watch coming up next week. Yeah. Like the national team, the Tournament of the Americas, these are teams that we would expect to be competing for a medal come the end of this summer. And they're playing a tournament that starts on Monday. So I'm excited. I haven't found where it's televised yet, but it's got to be somewhere.
You'd hope. Yeah, that's it's interesting to hear about that. Not something that crossed my radar at all. So I was really glad that you brought that up, and thanks for your sources as well for shedding some light on that as well. Duran's obviously the one that stood out to me the most so far as guys that we thought might be getting the call up soon. Even with Verdugo getting hurt recently, obviously he's okay now, but any kind of opening there, you're like, it's Duran season. It's Jared Duran season. Probably not, to your point. No reason to call up a guy like Jared Duran for a day or a week just to send him, packing to play.
Japan.
Yeah, to Japan of all places. So maybe more of a September call up type of situation in that regard, or possibly not at all. So we'll see. I believe that the rules for time experience for prospects went back to what it used to be, where if they get called up in September,
so it doesn't count in September.
It doesn't count.
Nice.
So there's that as well. Any prospects that you've been looking to stash, thinking that they might get a call up anytime soon, Steve? Or are you more of a, wait and see?
No, I definitely like to be aggressive there. And that's definitely why I shot the COR question to Kevin there. That's a great source, and we'll definitely be even more interested in now that it seems like it could be any week now, kind of. Maybe even with who knows when the actual Super 2 deadline, like even the teams don't know. But that's coming up relatively soon. It's usually sometime in mid to late June.
Yeah, I think 2 or 3 weeks they'll feel pretty comfortable.
That's something too. I'm stashing Bruhan in a league. I think that should be relatively soon, sort of once that Super 2 deadline hits. And then another thing that, like you said, with 40-man, I think Josh Lowe is actually on the Rays 40-man. So I know it's Bruhan and Wander who's going to be first. Like a dark horse, if you could bet on things like that, I think a nice long shot would be Lowe, just because he is on that 40-man. And he's been pretty good for Durham there too. I know not to the extent that Bruhan and Wander have been, but he's been holding his own and doing really well at AAA. That's something that I'm just keeping on. Basically, stashing the entire Rays AAA team wouldn't be a bad idea if you had spots.
Yes, Josh Lowe is in fact on the 40-man, as is Vidal Brujan. So to echo your point, I think you have a better chance of seeing them in Tampa before Franco, not only for the 40-man, but I've been saying this for a while, just time manipulation and arbitration for Franco. Those are concerns of mine with the Tampa Bay organization. So good call outs there. Kevin, I'm going to leave it to you for any parting words you have for our listeners when it comes to strategy or just ways to keep yourself calm as we continue the grind that is a full season of fantasy baseball.
I think it's more along the lines of staying calm this week than strategy. We talked about it. I thought that was really interesting when it was brought to my attention about the Olympic rosters and like you said, and that was really cool. And that kind of led me into there's cool baseball coming up. It's a holiday weekend. I end my article every week with enjoy the games. And we have this Tournament of the Americas starts Monday. Next weekend, the NCAA regionals begin Friday, I should say. Super regionals the following weekend. A lot of great baseball coming up. So enjoy the games.
Nice. Great advice there. And it's nice to be able to enjoy as much as you can, even if you're stressing. And if you're still drafting, if you're in those second chance leagues, still take a second to take a breath and watch the game.
Have you guys been to a live game yet?
I have not either. I'm in the New York area, so I usually start to go to games around now in a normal time. I like to wait out April. The worst possible thing in my mind is getting stuck at a 40-degree game in the middle of Queens and wanting to go home by the third inning, despite how much I love baseball. But definitely plan on getting to one very soon. So that's exciting as well. And like Kevin said, it's just a great time for baseball. It's going to be the dog days soon, and that's some of my favorite parts, even though it gets overlooked and the excitement of draft season and early season is faded. But there's still a lot of great baseball that's on the way. So definitely we'll be taking Kevin's advice and enjoying the games.
I haven't been there since 2019 as of yet either, but Northwest Arkansas, AA Royals affiliate, the home of Bobby Witt Jr. and 8 other Royals top 30 prospects, are playing a couple hours from my house a week from Tuesday. So as much as I want Witt Jr. to get the call, I'm hoping it's at least another week and a half. And we're going to go have a good time.
Yeah, I'm in Indianapolis, so I have a AAA team. Unfortunately, it's a AAA team for the Pirates. So not always that tempting to jump in there unless they have a good matchup. I went to a game a couple years ago there. It was a very similar situation as what you're talking about, Kevin, with hoping to see Bobby Witt. It was the weekend of the induction ceremony at the Hall of Fame induction ceremony a couple years ago. And I was really excited because they were playing the Buffalo Bison, which is the AAA organization for the Blue Jays. I'm like, all right, I get to see Vlad before he gets the call. Awesome. Of course, Vlad stays in Cooperstown to watch his father get inducted and did not get a chance to see him play there. And he got the call like the next day to Toronto. So never had a chance to see him in the minor leagues. Hopefully sooner or later, I'll see him in a major league game. But hopefully I'll get to a game this summer. I go on vacation later in July. We're going to Charleston, and they have a single A affiliate down there. And I'm hoping I can sneak away from.
Yeah, I think that's the River Dogs.
Yeah, the Charleston River Dogs. And so I'm hoping to. I haven't been to that low of a level yet. I've been to a few AA and AAA games. I haven't been to any. I've been to a high A, Fort Mason. The Padres have their Midwest League there, so that was fun. But that's where I got to see Franco. So at least I've seen Franco in person as they were visiting there. So hopefully we get to a game, at the very least one game this summer. It's felt really weird not talking about baseball for so long without actually being there in person. So at least a little bit. So it's a good call out there. All right. Again, I'll echo, if there's any players that you were thinking about bidding on and you want us to discuss them, please let us know. You can email us at onthewirepod@gmail.com. Of course, you can shoot us a DM on the Twitter at onthewirepod. And you can join PL Plus over at pitcherlist.com, where you get access to the Pitcherlist Discord. We're talking FAAB advice and baseball 24/7. You can get the advice and banter of over 900 members, including all three of us that are on the pod today, and the incredibly smart staff just wanting to help you win all of your leagues. Again, I want to thank Steve Gesuele for joining us for this episode. Hey, Steve, could you remind all of our listeners where they can listen to you or read your work and anything you might be working on that they should?
Yeah, you can hear us, myself and my great co-host Van Burnett, over at Wins Above Fantasy every Wednesday. You could find that on Twitter at Wins Above Pod. You could find me on Twitter talking and retweeting stuff about baseball at Stav8818, STAV8818. So hit me up there. I'm active in the Discord, love talking trades and everything like that. So that's a great way to get involved too. But yeah, thanks again for having me on. This was a ton of fun. I listen to you guys, and you're part of my weekly rundown to prepare for FAAB. So that to actually be on it is nice, and really, really glad and thankful that you guys were able to have me on. Keep great work, and we'll be sure to tune in every week to you guys. It's essential for anyone putting in bids each week.
Steve. As we're getting close to the 2-hour mark, I have a question for you. As an avid listener of our pod, question: do you listen to us on 0, 1.5, or 2 speed?
on 1, so like the normal speed. Yeah, I listen to them.
I don't blame anybody that listens to us at 1.5.
For sure, I get that too. But all of my baseball pods, I usually tend to listen to on 1, and I even have to go back a lot of times too. I listen to. That's basically all I really listen to is fantasy baseball pods. I know I'm a really cool person, but I just find like there's so much useful information. It's a great way to take it in. I know there's great articles to read in every way too, but especially when I was commuting into New York City every day, it's just a great way to consume the information. And if it didn't like slow this is going to sound weird, like to listen to it on half speed almost, it sounds weird, but that's the way that I would almost take in more information. I listen to you guys and all of my baseball pods on normal 1x speed. Nice. Okay. Yeah, I've definitely been guilty of tuning it up to 1.5. I can't do 2 times speed. I don't know who's talking. I can't do it. But 1.5, especially on the longer podcasts like ours, I don't blame anybody for cranking it up to there. Well, make sure you are following Steve on the Twitter. We'll have links to his Twitter account and to, of course, Wins Above Fantasy as well in the show description. So check that out there for direct access. And that is going to do it for this week's On the Wire. You can follow me on the Twitter at 80grade, all spelled out, and Kevin at HastingKevin. And make sure you keep an eye out for Kevin's weekly FAAB preview article every Sunday, as well as my FAAB review article titled Waiver Watcher that comes out about midweek each week over at pitcherlist.com. And follow at pitcherlist on the Twitter for all the news and notes that come out throughout the site throughout the course of the week, which there are plenty of. As we mentioned at the top of the show, we are a proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network, along with 20 other incredible podcasts, including Steve's Win Above Fantasy. Make sure to follow at Pitcher List Pods to get an update about every new episode that drops from each of them and give them all a listen. We wish you the best of luck in all of your leagues and hope you win every single bid by exactly $1. Thanks once again to Steve for joining us, and for Kevin Hastings, I am Adam Howe. With that, we bid you goodbye.
TaxAct knows you don't look forward to taxes. TaxAct doesn't even look forward to taxes, and TaxAct is a tax software company. It's basically TaxAct's whole thing. If TaxAct did things over, maybe TaxAct would end up teaching kindergarten or leading fly fishing tours. But that's a different story for a different ad. So why don't we just agree that taxes aren't fun, but you still have to do them? TaxAct's filing software can help you do that. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
The reviews are in for McDonald's hotter, juicier burgers. Let's hear what Hamburglar has to say.
Robble, robble.
What our old friend Hamburglar said is, the patties are juicier. The bun is a thing of beauty. The cheese perfectly melted.
Robble.
My burger dreams have come true. You heard him, folks. These are McDonald's best burgers ever. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Robble. Available at most restaurants in this area. Comparison of McDonald's classic burgers to prior burgers.
When it comes to teaching kids and teens about money, practice makes perfect. That's where Greenlight comes in. With a debit card and money app of their own, kids learn to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest. Parents send instant money transfers, create custom chores, and automate allowance, while kids track their spending, set savings goals, and practice money skills they can use today and for life. Get 1 month free when you sign up at greenlight.com/podcast.